My name is Rachel Goldman, and I am a professor of ancient Near Eastern studies from Princeton, New Jersey. What I'm about to share with you will challenge everything you know about history, faith, and the thin veil between life and death. I've kept this testimony private for months, sharing it only with my closest colleagues and family. But now, I feel compelled to share it with the world. On September 15, 2023, during an archaeological excavation in Jerusalem, I experienced what the medical team later confirmed as clinical death for 8 minutes and 42 seconds. I was leading a dig at the City of David, specifically studying the ancient water systems, including Hezekiah's tunnel. The day was unusually hot, and we were working in a newly discovered chamber when part of the tunnel collapsed. A fallen beam struck my head, and I was buried under several feet of debris. What happened next changed my life forever. But before we start, please let me know where you're listening from. It will be nice to feel closer, even if we're physically apart. Also, don't forget to like and comment on what you thought about this near-death experience testimony. Let's have a fair and open discussion so we can learn from each other on this channel. Enjoy listening. The transition from life to death wasn't instant. It was like sinking into deep water. I remember the pressure of the debris, the taste of dust, and then a sensation of floating. I could see my body below, surrounded by my panicked colleagues as they desperately tried to dig me out. Dr. Cohen, our team's medical officer, was performing CPR, her face intense with concentration. But I felt no pain, no fear, only a profound sense of peace. Then everything changed. A light appeared, but calling it just light doesn't do it justice. It was like seeing color for the first time after living in a black and white world. The light had substance, personality, purpose. As it enveloped me, I felt myself being drawn through what I can only describe as a corridor of time itself. When the light faded, I found myself standing in ancient Jerusalem, but not as a ghost or an observer. I was fully present, with all my senses heightened beyond anything I'd ever experienced. The air was thick with the scent of olive wood smoke and incense. I could feel the rough stone beneath my feet, hear the murmur of prayers in ancient Hebrew, taste the dust in the air. This wasn't like watching a historical reenactment or viewing an archaeological site. This was real, more real than anything I'd ever experienced. That's when I heard his voice. Rachel. I turned and saw him, Jesus. But not the Jesus of Sunday school paintings or Hollywood movies. His presence was overwhelming, both terrifying and comforting at the same time. His eyes held the weight of eternity, yet they sparkled with immediate warmth and recognition. When he smiled, it felt like sunrise after the longest night. You've spent your life studying these stones, he said, gesturing to the walls of Jerusalem. Now you will understand why they still speak. As a scholar, I'd spent decades studying this period of history. I'd written papers about the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem, analyzed the archaeological evidence, debated the historical accuracy of biblical accounts. But nothing in my academic career had prepared me for this. Jesus took my hand, and suddenly we were standing on the walls of Jerusalem. The sight before me made my heart stop. Spread out across the valley was the Assyrian army, 185,000 strong. The archaeological estimates I'd worked with came nowhere close to capturing the terrifying magnitude of this force. Their camps stretched to the horizon, their weapons gleaming in the moonlight. The sheer scale of the army made Jerusalem look like a pebble before a mountain. Watch carefully, Jesus said, for few have been granted the privilege of witnessing this moment of intersection between heaven and earth. He began to explain things I'd never understood from the texts. He showed me how Sennacherib's armies had systematically conquered every fortified city in Judah, demonstrating their superior siege techniques. I saw the psychological warfare tactics of Rabshakeh with a clarity no historical document could provide. Jesus led me closer to where Rabshakeh, the Assyrian commander, stood before Jerusalem's walls. I could hear his voice clearly as he spoke in Hebrew, not Aramaic, deliberately ensuring every citizen could understand his threats. The historical texts I'd studied captured his words, but they couldn't convey the calculated cruelty in his tone. Do you see how he weaponizes fear? Jesus asked. This tactic hasn't changed through the centuries. The enemy still speaks the language of God's people to deceive them. I watched as Rabshakeh delivered his psychological warfare, every word exactly as recorded in the ancient texts I'd studied. Has any god of any nation ever rescued his land from the king of Assyria? The arrogance in his voice made me shudder. As a historian, I'd analyzed these words countless times, but hearing them spoken with such contempt gave them new meaning. Jesus then transported us inside the city walls. I saw King Hezekiah in a way no historical record could capture. Gone was the distant historical figure I'd lectured about. Instead, I saw a man of flesh and blood, his royal robes covered in sackcloth, his face marked with the weight of responsibility for his people. Rachel, Jesus said, you've taught about Hezekiah's reforms, but now see what true spiritual leadership looks like. He showed me scenes from earlier in Hezekiah's reign, the reopening of the temple, the destruction of idolatrous high places, the restoration of proper worship. I witnessed the Passover celebration that the biblical texts describe as unmatched since the days of Solomon. The joy and reverence of that moment brought tears to my eyes. Your archaeological studies found evidence of these reforms, Jesus noted. But artifacts can't capture the spiritual transformation of a nation. We moved through the city, and I saw the defensive preparations I'd only theorized about in my academic work. The Siloam Tunnel, which I'd been studying just before my accident, was more impressive in its original context than in its current state. I watched workers completing the water system, understanding now why it took such unusual turns. They were following natural rock fissures, just as some of us had hypothesized. Your recent discoveries about the tunnel's construction, Jesus said, they're correct. But you missed the most important aspect, the faith that inspired such engineering. Then Jesus showed me something that challenged my academic understanding. He took me to the temple, where Hezekiah was praying. I heard his actual words, his voice thick with emotion as he spread Sennacherib's threatening letter before the Lord. As a historian, I'd always approached this account analytically, but witnessing it transformed my understanding. Notice, Jesus said, he doesn't just pray for deliverance. He prays for God's name to be glorified. Throughout the night, Jesus showed me scenes that filled gaps in our historical record. I saw the strategic discussions among Jerusalem's leaders, the preparations for siege, the distribution of resources. But most importantly, I witnessed the faith that historical documents could never fully capture. Then came the moment that would change everything. As darkness deepened over Jerusalem, Jesus said, now watch carefully. This is what happens when heaven responds to faith. The air changed. It's hard to describe, like the pause before a lightning strike, but deeper, more profound. Then I saw it, the angel of the Lord. No artistic representation could ever capture this being's appearance. It was like trying to describe a symphony using only colors, or explaining light to someone who has never seen. The angel's presence was both beautiful and terrifying, radiating power that made the mighty Assyrian army look like children's toys. This is divine intervention, Jesus explained. Not as your scholars debate it, but as it truly is. I watched in awe as the angel moved through the Assyrian camp. There was no dramatic battle, no clash of weapons. Instead, death came with terrible silence. I saw 185,000 mighty warriors simply stop breathing, their spirits departing in an instant. It was both terrible and magnificent, a demonstration of divine power that defied human understanding. Your archaeological records, Jesus said, they found evidence of this event, didn't they? Yes, they had. The Sennacherib prism, which I'd studied extensively, boasted about besieging Jerusalem but conspicuously never claimed its capture. Now I understand why. I watched as Sennacherib, the mighty king who had dared to mock God, fled in terror. Jesus then showed me something I hadn't expected, the impact of this event on history. I saw how this divine intervention shaped not just Jerusalem's future, but the course of human history. The Assyrian Empire's momentum was broken, leading to changes that aligned perfectly with the historical record I'd studied. You see, Rachel, Jesus said, history isn't just a sequence of events. It's a testimony to divine faithfulness. Throughout the night, Jesus revealed deeper meanings behind historical details I'd studied for years. He showed me why Hezekiah's tunnel took its peculiar route, explained the true significance of archaeological findings I'd puzzled over, and revealed the spiritual dimensions of political decisions I'd analyzed. As the night progressed, Jesus showed me more than just the events. He he revealed their deeper significance. We stood watching as the sun rose over Jerusalem, revealing the aftermath of divine intervention. The sight was both awesome and terrible. 185,000 warriors lay silent, struck down not by human weapons but by divine power. "Rachel," Jesus said, "you've studied the historical records of this event. Tell me what secular history says about this night." Drawing on my academic knowledge, I mentioned Herodotus's account of a plague of mice destroying the Assyrian army's equipment, and the conspicuous absence of Jerusalem's conquest in Sennacherib's otherwise boastful records. "Yes," Jesus smiled. "Even when human records try to explain away divine intervention, they can't help but testify to the truth. Watch what happens next." I witnessed the people of Jerusalem emerging from their homes, their initial confusion turning to awe as they realized what had happened. The mighty Assyrian army that had seemed invincible just hours before lay still and silent. But Jesus showed me something the historical records hadn't captured: the profound spiritual impact on the survivors. "Look at their faces," he said. "This is what happens when human pride meets divine power." He then transported me to Nineveh, where I watched Sennacherib's inglorious end, assassinated by his own sons in the temple of his false god. The historical records I'd studied confirmed this detail, but seeing it firsthand gave it new meaning. The man who had mocked the living God met his end before a lifeless idol. "Now," Jesus said, "let me show you something your archaeological studies haven't yet discovered." He revealed details about ancient Jerusalem that confirmed some of our theories and challenged others. I saw how the city's defenses were structured, understood why certain artifacts were found where they were, and witnessed daily life details that would revolutionize our understanding of the period. Then Jesus did something unexpected. He began showing me parallels between this ancient event and our modern world. I saw how the same patterns of pride, faith, and divine intervention continue to play out in human history. "The Assyrian army represents more than just an ancient threat," he explained. "It represents every seemingly overwhelming force that stands against faith. Watch how this pattern repeats." He showed me scenes from throughout history, moments when human pride rose up against divine truth, and how God responded. I saw how the lesson of Hezekiah's faith remained relevant through every age. As we observed these scenes, Jesus explained deeper truths about faith and pride that I'd never understood despite my years of academic study. He showed me how archaeological evidence I'd examined actually confirmed spiritual principles I'd overlooked. "Your academic work," he said, "has focused on proving what happened. But the greater truth is understanding why it happened." Then Jesus revealed something that stunned me. He showed me how various archaeological discoveries yet to be made would further confirm this historical account. He explained why certain artifacts would be found in specific locations, revelations that would later prove startlingly accurate during future excavations. "Rachel," he said, "when you return, you'll understand why I chose someone with your background to witness this. The world needs to hear this story from someone who knows both the academic and spiritual perspectives." Then he showed me how the divine intervention that saved Jerusalem wasn't just about military deliverance. It was a pattern for how God deals with human pride and responds to faithful prayer. "Watch carefully," he said, "because this is what happens when heaven touches earth." I witnessed again the moment the angel of the Lord appeared, but this time Jesus helped me understand the deeper spiritual principles at work. The power that struck down the Assyrian army wasn't just about destruction, it was about vindicating faith and dealing with pride. In that profound moment, Jesus revealed to me layers of understanding about divine intervention that I had never grasped in my academic studies. He showed me how the angel's presence that night operated on multiple levels of reality: physical, spiritual, and eternal. "Look deeper," Jesus instructed, guiding my attention to the intricate spiritual dynamics at work. "See how the angel's intervention wasn't random or merely punitive." I watched in awe as the angel moved through the camp with precise purpose. Each action carried deep significance that Jesus helped me understand. The angel's presence created what I can only describe as a spiritual resonance, like ripples in the fabric of reality itself. These ripples, Jesus explained, would echo through history in ways that shaped not just Israel's future, but humanity's understanding of divine justice and mercy. "Notice," Jesus said, "how the angel's presence affects different souls differently. He showed me how the same divine power that brought death to the proud brought profound peace to the faithful within Jerusalem's walls. Even before the people knew of their deliverance, their spirits sensed the divine presence and responded with inexplicable calm. Jesus then revealed something that had never been recorded in any historical document: the precise spiritual mechanics of how the angel accomplished this massive intervention. "This is what your scholars have never understood," he said. "The angel didn't just end lives. It separated pride from power, arrogance from authority. Each soldier's fate was sealed not by arbitrary divine violence, but by their own spiritual condition in the face of holy presence. I witnessed how the angel's power operated with surgical precision, differentiating between levels of pride and rebellion in each heart. Some soldiers died instantly, their arrogance becoming their own sword. Others experienced a moment of revelation before their end, their last thoughts a recognition of the divine they had mocked. A few, very few survived, marked by a humility that would transform their lives and influence others. Remember, Jesus said, every divine intervention carries echoes of both judgment and mercy. Even in this moment of massive judgment, seeds of mercy were being planted. He showed me how this event established a pattern that would repeat throughout history, not always with the same scale or visibility, but with the same spiritual principles at work. I saw how divine intervention always involves this same precise discernment between pride and humility, between rebellion and submission. This is why pride is so dangerous, Jesus explained. It creates a spiritual resonance that attracts judgment, not because God is vengeful, but because pride itself is incompatible with divine presence. Just as light naturally displaces darkness, divine holiness naturally displaces human pride. Jesus then revealed something that stunned me: how this principle operated not just in massive historical events, but in individual lives throughout time. He showed me countless moments where the same spiritual dynamics played out on a smaller scale, in homes, in churches, in business dealings, in personal decisions. The angel you see here, Jesus said, represents a permanent spiritual reality. Divine power always stands ready to intervene, always operates with this same precision, always responds to genuine faith while opposing pride. The scale may differ, but the principles remain constant. He helped me understand how Hezekiah's response to the crisis established a template for all future spiritual victories. Notice, Jesus pointed out, how Hezekiah's external actions flowed from internal spiritual alignment. His prayer wasn't just words, it was the culmination of a life aligned with divine purpose. I saw how every detail of Hezekiah's earlier reforms, his destruction of idols, his restoration of proper worship, his trust in God's protection, had created a spiritual foundation that made this dramatic intervention possible. This is why preparation in times of peace matters so much, Jesus explained. It builds the spiritual infrastructure that can sustain divine intervention in times of crisis. Then Jesus showed me something that made my academic heart race: the precise correlation between spiritual principles and historical outcomes. He revealed how divine intervention always follows patterns, always respects human free will while simultaneously accomplishing divine purposes, and always weaves together justice and mercy in perfect balance. Watch how the angel's power affects the physical realm, Jesus instructed. I saw how divine intervention rippled through multiple dimensions: spiritual, physical, historical, personal. The angel's presence created what I can only describe as a moment of absolute clarity, a point where spiritual reality and physical reality perfectly aligned. This alignment, Jesus explained, is what your scholars mistake for natural causes. They see the effects, the deaths, the political changes, the historical transitions, but miss the spiritual causation behind them. He showed me how this principle explains why different historical sources record the same event differently. Herodotus's account of a plague of mice, the Assyrian record's conspicuous silence, the biblical narrative's direct attribution to the angel, all were attempts to describe the same reality from different levels of spiritual perception. Understanding this, Jesus said, will help you bridge the gap between faith and scholarship. Both are seeing the same truth, just from different vantage points. Then Jesus revealed something that would revolutionize my understanding of history itself. He showed me how divine intervention creates what he called spiritual nodes, points in time where heaven's purpose manifests so clearly that it creates permanent changes in both spiritual and physical reality. The night you're witnessing, he explained, is one such node. Its effects ripple both forward and backward in time, influencing events in ways your historical methods can't fully track. I saw how this intervention had implications far beyond just saving Jerusalem. It established patterns of divine-human interaction that would echo through centuries. It created spiritual precedents that would shape future prayers, future faith, future divine interventions. This is why studying history matters, Jesus said. Each divine intervention creates templates that future generations can access through faith. The God who acted here didn't just save Jerusalem. He demonstrated principles that would guide his people through all future crises. Then Jesus showed me something that made me gasp, how this ancient intervention contained encoded messages for our modern world. I saw how the spiritual principles demonstrated here perfectly addressed contemporary challenges, how the patterns established that night provided solutions for current global crises. The pride of Assyria, Jesus explained, keeps reappearing in new forms: technological arrogance, institutional pride, national hubris. But the answer remains the same: humble faith that recognizes divine sovereignty. The implications were staggering. As a scholar, I had always approached ancient texts looking backward, trying to understand what had happened. Now I saw how these events were actually positioned to speak forward through time, providing templates for future divine interventions. Then Jesus turned to me and said, "Rachel, you've died to witness this. But I'm sending you back with more than just a story to tell. You're going back with an understanding that bridges the gap between faith and scholarship." Suddenly, I felt myself being pulled back. The scenes of ancient Jerusalem began to fade, but Jesus' voice remained clear. "Tell them what you've seen. Tell them that the God who defended Jerusalem still acts today. Tell them that faith still matters, that prayer still changes things, and that pride still leads to destruction." The return was different from the departure. Instead of floating, I felt like I was rushing through time itself. I could hear voices getting louder, modern voices, urgent and professional. I felt pain return, the weight of my physical body, the trauma of my injuries. I gasped awake in the archaeological site's medical tent, surrounded by shocked medical personnel. Dr. Cohen was still there, her hand shaking as she checked my vital signs. "Impossible," she whispered. "You were gone for almost 9 minutes. The injuries that should have killed me had somehow been healed." The medical team couldn't explain how I had survived being clinically dead for so long without brain damage. But I knew the truth. I had died to gain understanding, and returned to share it. In the months following my near-death experience, I meticulously recorded every detail of what I witnessed, details that have reshaped both my academic research and my faith. I compared my observations with established historical records, archaeological findings, and biblical accounts. Every aspect aligned perfectly with verified facts, yet revealed dimensions of understanding that traditional research could never grasp. This isn't mere history, it's a divine message that demands our immediate attention. Jesus revealed insights into future archaeological discoveries, predictions that have already come true. Recent excavations unearthed exactly what he foretold, in the precise locations he indicated. This isn't a coincidence. It is compelling evidence that confirms the historical accuracy of events long recorded. These revelations force us to reconsider what we know about the past and what it means for our present. We cannot afford to ignore these signs when history itself calls us to act. My transformation has not gone unnoticed by my peers. My teaching and research now carry an urgency fueled by first-hand divine encounter. I explain not only what happened in ancient times, but also why it matters today. This experience has permanently altered my view of history and faith. Divine intervention is not an abstract theological debate. It is a dynamic force that has shaped human events and continues to do so. One of the most profound lessons came through witnessing a divine response to prayer, much like Hezekiah's. I learned that prayer is not a mere ritual. It is a direct line to a power capable of overturning the impossible. Genuine faith is about trusting God in moments when every circumstance seems insurmountable. In these troubled times, this message of hope is urgently needed. Despite some skeptics dismissing my experience as an oxygen deprivation hallucination, the historical details I recorded have been confirmed, and the archaeological predictions I made have been verified. The evidence is undeniable. The angel I encountered that fateful night was an awe-inspiring manifestation of divine power, executing judgment on the proud while preserving the humble. This same pattern, seen throughout history and in modern times, shows that pride leads to downfall and humble faith brings deliverance. Jesus made it clear that I was chosen to reveal that history isn't confined to dusty texts. It is alive in our daily struggles and triumphs. My medical records of near-death and inexplicable recovery, alongside corroborated historical insights, prove that God's intervention is not a relic of the past but an active force in our world today. Time is short. When you face your own insurmountable odds, remember that the same God who defended Jerusalem is still on the throne. Pride still leads to destruction, and only a humble, trusting faith can move mountains. This message of divine intervention is urgent. It calls us to act now before the forces of pride consume us. Our world cannot wait. Act, believe, and let the truth transform your life today.